After Kyle Rittenhouse's defense team requested a mistrial yesterday, and the judge said he'd take their request under advisement, more witnesses are expected to be called to testify today. Now, earlier in the show, Ryan and I discussed all of yesterday's developments in the proceedings during my radar. But now we want to turn to broader reactions to the trial from major media and political figures. MSNBC's Joy Ann Reid compared Rittenhouse to George Zimmerman.
I feel like I was having flashbacks to the George Zimmerman trial, right? I mean, everything from Kyle Rittenhouse using sort of cop speak about trying to stop the threat, saying this sort of really dramatic thing that the person he shot supposedly said that sounded like a gangster movie, and then this whole thing of, the whole breaking down and dry heaving in court. That was one thing that we didn't see from Zimmerman, but, making himself the victim and sort of making himself seem more innocent, which the Zimmerman trial also featured.
While CNN's Jeffrey Toobin admitted Rittenhouse might succeed in his self-defense claim, but not before calling him an idiot.
Jeffrey, Two thoughts. One, what kind of idiot 17-year-old gets a giant gun and goes to a riot? He has no license. He has no training. He thinks he's going to scrub graffiti off with his AR-15. I mean, the stupidity of this is like, what could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot went wrong. The good news for Kyle Rittenhouse is that he's not on trial for being an idiot. He's on trial for homicide. Right. And in that respect, I mostly agree with Joey that this is a tough case for the prosecution because it does seem like he has a plausible case of self-defense.
Yeah, Jeffrey Toobin is lucky that people do not face trial for being an idiot. Tulsi Gabbard blamed the Kenosha police and said prosecutors should have done more research before charging Rittenhouse.
The prosecutor in this Rittenhouse trial obviously did not do his due diligence before making the decision to prosecute. This tragedy never would have happened if the government had simply carried out its responsibilities to protect the safety, lives, and property of innocent people.
Here to discuss the current coverage of the trial and what kind of media reaction we can expect when a verdict is finally reached are Will Jawando, Democratic strategist and council member at large in Montgomery County, Maryland, and Amy Tarkanian, Republican strategist and former chairwoman of the Nevada State GOP. Will, how closely have you been following this trial, and how has the evidence that you've seen presented in it kind of matched with what you've seen from the mainstream media so far, like previous to the trial?
Sure. Well, it's unfortunate we're in a time where you have to decide which vigilante race-related killing you're going to tune into. We've got two going on now, obviously. Yesterday you have to cut to the Ahmaud Arbery, another set of vigilantes, trying to take the law into their own hands and having tragic results with the death of folks. So I'm aware of what happened yesterday. Look, this is a messy situation. There's so much wrong with the whole way everything went down. The people who came out there, it was a volatile situation. Obviously, the young man shouldn't have illegally was possessing a gun, came into a place and was not, shouldn't have been there, had no reason to be there. So I think that the case, you have to separate two things. The law, right? When someone runs at you and you have an AR-15, there's a lot of things before that. Should you be able to have an AR-15? I don't think so. He obviously wasn't legally able to possess that. He put himself in that situation. But once someone runs at you, the way our law is, I think the legal analysis that you heard is right. It's tough for the jury to decide whether he reasonably thought his life was in danger, which is the standard. Should he have been there? Should he have been in possessing that gun? Did he have pure motives? I think the answers to those are no, no, no. But that doesn't mean he's going to be charged with murder or convicted, rather.
Yeah. So, Amy, what do you? So obviously, I think there was initially a lot of conservative defense of Rittenhouse. We're in such a polarized, politicized media environment, what you're hearing from people on the right and what you're hearing from people in liberal media spaces is just like there were different facts of the prior to the case. But now that we're actually seeing the case, seeing what the prosecution has, I think a lot of people, even liberal political analysts are saying, yeah, look, the self-defense claim might very well hold up because the evidence is more favorable than you were led to believe.
Right, and I agree with Tulsi. It's an unfortunate situation, and this young man should not have put himself in that dangerous position. But I do also blame the fact that a lot of this violence could have been curbed and it could have been stopped and slowed down if there had been more enforcement on the ground, and if our political leaders had been more forceful in speaking out against what was taking place. You had people's livelihoods that were being broken into and possibly, ruined forever. But, granted, you can replace buildings, you can replace items, but you cannot replace a life. And unfortunately, there were lives taken in this situation. But like you just said, there is heavy evidence that he actually did act in self-defense. And I find it incredulous that you've got a majority of the mass media actually penning the right, if you will, calling this young man our hero. He's not our hero. This is a kid who put himself in a very tough situation, and he acted out in self-defense as he claims and as the evidence shows. And so, you once again, just like Will said, you need to follow the law, and that's clearly what he was doing. And I think the fact that you've got people across the aisle now with common sense seeing that this young man even went to the police station to turn himself in because he knew what he had done was in self-defense, I think it's pretty clear how this is going to end.
And so Malika Jabali criticized what she called right-wing control of our media landscape in reference to the trial on Twitter, writing, quote, "The Ahmaud Arbery trial is still happening at the same time as Kyle Rittenhouse's, but because the right has turned Rittenhouse into a hero and fodder for a culture war, it's his story that dominates." And Will, I want to ask you about that because it does seem that certainly if the right wanted to elevate, one of two vigilantes, that's certainly the more plausible case of some self-defense, and would be Rittenhouse, and and also the scenario where he describes himself as showing up to do medical work at the with an AR-15, but to do medical work, but with
no training, by the way,
a little bit of training, but right, he's 17 years old, yeah. But Ahmaud Arbery, just an utterly grotesque and horrific case where he's hunted down on the side of the road and killed. And it is interesting that trial is going on at the same time and getting much less attention than the Rittenhouse trial. I believe there is evidence for a conviction in the Arbery case. So two questions. What do you think drives the disparate nature of the attention being paid to the two cases, and do you expect that Arbery's trial will turn out differently?
Well, I think you're right, and I do want to take some exception with something that my colleague, Mr. Tarkanian, said. The right, certain segments of the right, again, everyone's not a monolith, have absolutely lifted up Rittenhouse as a hero. I mean, using that exact language. I mean, if you go on Twitter, those are all trending. You can look on Twitter. Not that Twitter is a good place to go for everything, but even in circles, you're hearing that sorry for the kid and hero. Those are the two things you hear the most. And I think the reason that not talking about that these people shouldn't have been killed, or you hear that the government did something wrong. Here's what I'll say. The Ahmaud Arbery trial is a straightforward going back into our history, our dark history of Black person being somewhere that someone thought they shouldn't be and being pursued and killed. And the evidence is strong there. And it should be getting more attention. But the reason you're seeing this other story get more attention is because it fits into the narrative of, our cities are under attack and we've got to go defend. And this whole militia vigilante narrative, which is dangerous. We've seen it. We saw it in Charlottesville. We've seen it on January 6th. We've seen it in other places. We're going to take this into our own hands and kill people. And that's what we need to push back against. It feeds that narrative, and they use the sympathetic, young boy who was a place where he shouldn't have been. But I think that's why you're seeing it get so much coverage.
It's not in the Kenosha situation. It's not just a narrative, right? There were buildings on fire. There were windows had been smashed. There was an actual lawless chaos going on. I totally agree that it should not fall to whatever you want to call them, to vigilantes, to private armed citizens to address this chaos, because that's going to result in more chaos. But you can't say that wasn't happening at all in that case. So I think it was irresponsible to set out to do what Rittenhouse set out to do, but it was also irresponsible of the people who caused all that mayhem.
Absolutely, but again, we're talking about property versus a life. I think I do agree with my colleague on that point, and we don't have a system where if the government failed, I'm an elected official, our job is to make sure our emergency management police are protecting folks. But that's a community and a government's job. And there's fair criticism on that. But that doesn't what I'm saying is it feeds this narrative if he is acquitted. And the reason it's getting so much attention is because people want to believe, a large swath of our country wants to believe that it's their job to pick up an AR-15 and go protect this country from people they don't think have the right or don't agree with them. And that is the problem. And that's why I think the narrative of this attention on this case is going to be even more troubling for the country going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think the Arbery case doesn't fit that narrative as well, because there's absolutely nothing that you can say about Arbery that remotely implicates him in any wrongdoing whatsoever. He wasn't even protesting anything. Not that there's anything wrong with protesting, but he wasn't even doing that. He was just on for a jog. Amy, what's your guess as to why these trials are getting such disparate treatment?
Sure. Well, it's going to be a very sad answer that I'm going to give, because I believe that the Ahmaud trial, that's going to be a much easier trial to finalize and come to a conclusion, where you have the Rittenhouse trial that is going to have more drama, more toxicity from either side. And so, it's going to be more intriguing. It's like watching a train wreck, and you can't turn away. And I believe that's probably why it's being viewed over the Ahmaud trial. And it entices more people to tune in, which is very sad for me to say out loud, but I believe that's the truth. And then when you have leaders like in New York, like the BLM leader, who actually is calling for bloodshed against Eric Adams, the former NYPD police, because of police reform. And then you see why Kyle Rittenhouse decided to make the unfortunate decision to go and protect property in his community against the rioters and the looters and the vandalizers. I mean, this has been an ongoing problem since the quote unquote summer of love, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. So unfortunately, no matter what happens in the end with Rittenhouse, I think we're going to see more chaos.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that last point, I mean, okay, a BLM protester saying that there shouldn't be police reform, calling for violence, I've never condoned that. But the idea that Black Lives Matter protesters, people protesting, have been killing people in the way that these vigilantes and Proud Boys and armed mobs and January 6th, it's just not even close to equivalent.
I didn't say they were killing people, but they are inciting violence. The BLM leader actually said there will be bloodshed in New York.
Yeah, and meanwhile, people actually being killed by folks who are supposedly protecting people. I think that's part of the narrative problem here.
And he was protecting himself. He shouldn't have been there, but he was protecting himself.
Yeah.
I agree. He should not have been there.
Yeah. It's true. Like there's been tons of, if you want to, the Proud Boys and Antifa scuffling in cities on the West Coast, they're I wish they could just go to some island, whatever, and work out their Civil War fantasies and not involve the rest of us, please. But
I agree.
Yeah.
It's a troubling situation. And, I just hope that we can move past this type of vigilante justice, because I don't think Joy Reid's comment, I know the media, she gets a lot of rap, but that comment about George Zimmerman, I think how this will be received by people, by Black people, it will be received like, here's another person who kills people, and obviously killed people, in this case, white, that just gets off, you know, and I think that's going to be a strong feeling too. And it's not good for the country. There should be some justice in this case.
I get that, but the collapse of civil society, the collapse of social services, of proper law enforcement, of deterrence, of property crimes and everything else. This is what arrives in the wake, and it's a very
right.
Very bad
and
thing.
I think Will's point though is a fair one in the sense that so many black people who have their own experience with the criminal justice system, or they know people who've had experiences with the criminal justice system and see the way that it works when the defendant is black, and then see what happens when it's George Zimmerman, and then they will see.
But there are white people that get convicted unfairly too, right?
For sure. I mean, half the people in prison are white. Like that's like 1 million people. Like, yes, there are. Yeah, yes, absolutely. But it is still disproportionately tilted against black people in this country.
But it also doesn't help when President Biden calls Rittenhouse a racist when clearly he was not targeting people of color.
There's a lot of bad mainstream, and Okay, we really got to wrap. Thank you guys so much, Will and Amy. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.